Welcome back everybody. In this video I've got a few exercises on loops for you. So here are the 4 problems that I want you to solve using while loops and for loops. So for each problem I want you to create a while loop version and a for loop version. So yeah, pause the video here and attempt to solve these problems. The last one is a little tricky, but I'm sure you can figure it out. I will be back with a solution right after. So the first problem was to print out all the numbers between -5 and 5. So let's start off with the while loop. I'm going to first of all create an integer variable called I, which is going to be equal to my starting number. So in this case, it's -5. Then inside of the start function, I'm going to create my while loop. The condition is going to be as long as the variable I is less than or equal to 5. So as long as the condition is true, then I will simply print out the variable I. And lastly, we need to increment by 1 our variable I. And that's it. Okay, now let's solve the same problem but using the for loop. So I'll go inside of the start function and I'll create the for loop. Now remember, inside the parentheses, we have to first create the variable, so int I equals -5, then add a semicolon, and now let's add the condition, so as long as I is less than or equal to 5. And finally, let's increment I by 1 each time we go through the loop. Inside of the curly brackets, let's simply print out the value of I. And there we go, that's our first problem solved. Let's move on to the next one. In this problem, we need to print out all the even numbers between 10 and 50. So there are a couple of different ways that you can do this, but I'm going to show you the easiest way. Let's start off with the while loop. So like usual, let's create our integer variable called I, and the starting value this time is going to be 10 because 10 is an even number. Then inside of the start function, I'll create the while loop. So for the condition, we'll continue to run this loop as long as I is less than or equal to 50. As long as this is true, then we're going to print out I. Now the trick that is going to make this loop only print out the even numbers is to increment by 2 the variable I each time we go through the loop, instead of just incrementing it by 1. So I will be equal to 10, then 12, then 14, 16, 18, and so on. Okay, that's it. Let's now do the same but using the for loop. So I'll just create a for loop inside of my start function. Now let's fill in the parentheses. So I'll create an integer variable called I that will start at 10. The loop will continue to run as long as I is less than or equal to 50. Each time we go through the loop, we will increment the variable I by 2. And then inside the curly brackets, we will simply print out the value of I. Alright, let's now tackle the final problem, which was to print out all the numbers divisible by 5 and 3 who are between 1 and 100. So let's create the while loop version. Like usual, we need to start off by creating an integer variable that I will call I, and the starting value this time is going to be 1. Then inside of the start function, I will create the while loop. The condition is going to be as long as I is less than or equal to 100. So for now, we're simply looping through all the numbers between 1 and 100. Let's now print out I, and let's increment by 1 the variable I. So if we leave everything like this, it will simply print out all the numbers between 1 and 100. But we only want to print out the ones who are divisible by 5 and 3. So we're actually going to create an if statement inside of the while loop. So the way we check if the variable I is divisible by 5 is to check if I modulo 5 is equal to 0. Because if I divided by 5 has a remainder of 0, then it means the number is perfectly divisible by 5. But we also want the number to be divisible by 3. So I will change another condition using the double ampersand, and we will check if I modulo 3 is equal to 0. So remember guys, we're using the double ampersand and not the double pipe character because we want both conditions to be true in order to run the code. And the code that we're going to run is simply to print I. So as a recap, we're looping through all the numbers between 1 and 100, but each time we go through the loop, we're checking if that number is divisible by 5 and 3, and only then are we printing out the number I. That's it. Okay, so let's do the same but for the for loop. So I'll create the for loop inside of the start function. We will create the variable I that will start at 0. We will go through the loop as long as I is less than or equal to 100, and we will increment I by 1 each time we go through the loop. And now instead of just printing I directly, we will first check if I is divisible by 5 and 3 using the very handy modulo operator. And if this double condition is true, then we are safe to print out the variable I. Alright, that's all for this little exercise on loops. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!